everyone. It's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy A51 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. Now, the thing with this particular phone you have to remember is that this is not supposed to be like the main flagship of the year that this, phone was supposed to be coming out. This is supposed to be a cheaper budget phone that they made. That's supposed to be a good phone that people can buy and kind of use, and they can kind of just move on with their life and they can upgrade whenever they want to. This was like an off-contract phone. You may have been able to buy it on contract at the time, whatever. This was like a budget phone you walk into Best Buy and expect it to be in like the budget, So if you want to pick up some phones that I would actually recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, the big thing I recommend doing here for the most part is to keep in mind that this particular device, for the most part, it's a fairly cheap phone. It came out in 2019, and this was supposed to be one of the big things to keep in mind here for the most part. It's a cheap phone. So 2019, their A series definitely cheaper than their S series at the time. On the front side of this particular phone, you're getting a 6.5-inch Super AMOLED display. Now that display size is actually pretty respectable, and it's a very, very good size display for what you're getting. This was not like a super cheap phone this was not the cheapest phone they made. There was their, A11 that they had at the time, but this one was actually pretty cheap, and it still had a pretty decent panel. 1080p, display on it too. It was a 60 hertz panel, definitely not 120 hertz or anything at that time. But if you think about what other phones came out in 2019, like the Samsung Galaxy S phone came out in this particular year too, a little bit, later, like almost towards the S20. When you take a look at the S10, that phone had, definitely didn't look that much worse than this phone, if I'm being honest. So there was still a lot of capability with the Samsung Galaxy 15 or the A51, and it didn't look that terrible for that particular year. So I want to get that out of the way. Although this is a little bit of a dated panel, it didn't look terrible at the time. So just one of those things to keep in mind there. Now, on top of that, you're getting that USB Type-C port on the bottom, which still looks very good. I like the way this particular phone holds up from that particular perspective. It's still a USB-C port and not a, micro USB that you get on some other A series from before. You're also getting a micro SD card slot in this phone as well, which is another really nice thing to have. Having a micro SD card slot inside of your phone is still killer. I love having that type of capability, and this is definitely no exception. It's a very, very nice thing to have here, and it definitely 100% gets a thumbs up for me, and it still is one of my most favorite things going on for these particular devices. It's just going through, buying a phone, and getting expandable storage. Definitely one of my most favorite things going on here as well. On top of that, this phone on the back side, it was giving you its, camera setup on the back, which we'll talk about in a second. This full-on plastic back, this phone was pretty much built out of plastic, and that was kind of it. There's not really anything on this phone that you'd be surprised at and be like, oh my goodness, this phone was so cheap, but it gave you this type of capability. I think back then there may have been some things, but for the most part, you're getting a fairly basic type of display, fairly basic type of everything in today's standards. But at that time, getting a super, AMOLED display on a phone like this was actually very, very cool, and kind of was a really cool thing going on. So that in and of itself kind of covers it up here for the most part. Now on top of that, the price tag of this particular phone is about $100-ish in the used market. It's probably even cheaper than that, but I think even, paying even like $50 for this phone probably isn't worth it anymore. And the main reason for that is because this phone basically is done getting software updates and so many other things across the board that way too. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to go and buy this phone for a particular perspective, because you can go ahead and buy some other phones that might be giving you a better experience that we'll talk about later on in this video, or that are already linked down in the description. So you can check those out from there if you want to. But I will tell you, in my personal opinion, this phone in a lot of ways kind of is already done getting software updates, and it's done getting a lot of other things. So because of that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go and buy these types of phones when it comes down to it. So that right there is just another big, massive thing to keep in mind there as well. Now from the camera side, like I mentioned before, the camera on this particular phone was a pretty interesting one. So it was a quadruple camera setup. So you're getting a 48 megapixel wide, 12 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel macro, and then a 5 megapixel depth camera. The thing with this particular camera you have to keep in mind is that although it's a quadruple camera and you look at it and be like, oh my goodness, like it's so nice to have this type of camera, it is kind of a limited type of camera when it comes down to it, even for 2019 standards. Now, I love having an ultra-wide camera. I think it's some very, very cool stuff, and having that type of capability in and of itself is a very nice thing to have. But when you're looking at phones nowadays, like, you probably want to go ahead and get a phone that's going to be giving you a little bit of a better experience in the camera department. And this phone's camera really isn't doing it any favors anymore. It is pretty glitchy a little. It's not glitchy. I wouldn't say that's necessarily the worst thing about it, but it definitely isn't going to be like the best performing camera of all time anymore. And that's going to be the problem. But this phone, when it first came out, wasn't the best performing camera at that time either. So there's no point in getting a phone like this and then like expecting it to be the best. It's only going to be a problem if you're expecting it to be amazing. Other than that, I think for the average person out there, you're going to be getting a very, very solid camera for an old A series phone. but for today's standards, it's not that great. So I guess, again, just temper your expectations a little bit. Regardless of that, though, if you're not going to be going crazy on this particular phone's camera, then I think you should be okay for the most part, and that's really all I have to say about this particular camera from that particular standpoint. The biggest downside, though, of this phone, probably in today's standards, though, as you probably would have suspected, is the fact that it's no longer getting software updates. So if you're going to go through and you're buying a phone in today's standards, you need to get a phone that is still supported with software. That way you still have things to look forward to when this phone is kind of like, the point when you buy it. You don't want to go ahead and have, buy a phone and then it's pretty much done with everything. Like, you still want to have some things to look forward to. But the big thing too is like security. Like, the security of your phone is going to get better and better as more and more software updates come out. So just like one other thing to kind of keep in mind there too. And when you're buying a phone like this, that's kind of what to expect here, in my personal opinion. So if I'm going through and buying a phone like this, I want it to be, great quality and everything like that. But I definitely want it to be of better quality if I'm going through and buying a phone that's, still getting software updates. And that is basically what's going on here. You're not getting a phone that's going to be giving you, and that's going to be getting you any more software updates when it comes down to it. So keep that in mind. In terms of performance, this is another very interesting thing going on for this particular phone too. So this phone is going to be giving you that Exynos 9611 chipset inside with 4 or 6 or 8 gigabytes of RAM. So there's a massive range of, in RAM that you can basically get with this particular device. And that in and of itself, again, is another big thing to keep in mind. If you're getting the base model of this phone, it's going to perform very differently than the top tier model of this particular device. So if I'm going through and getting a, certain phone, I definitely like having a phone that's going to be giving me very good experience, very good build quality, very good everything, and very good performance. With this phone, it's not really going to be giving you any of those things anymore. I think the performance at the time when it first came out was respectable, especially compared to the Galaxy S10. I think the S10's, wasn't bad, and it was actually pretty decent. But with the Galaxy A51, it's not as good as the, S10, and the S10 in this day and age isn't that great, and neither is the A51. So those are very, very big things to keep in mind, because if you're going through and getting a phone like this, again, you want it to be as great of quality as possible, and this phone is not going to be giving you a great quality, it's not going to be giving you great quality performance anymore. Although the battery life is actually pretty decent, 4,000 mAh battery inside of this phone, definitely not that bad, and I do think that is actually pretty relevant for this type of device when it comes down to it. So to kind of sum it up, what I will definitely tell you, I like the Samsung Galaxy A51 when it first came out. I think when it first came out, it was a great phone. I think it had a lot of capability and everything, and I do think for a lot of people out there, it's still a very, very relevant, good device that I recommend people to buy. The thing though with this phone nowadays, the reason why I probably would not recommend buying it anymore is because it's done getting software updates, it's done getting software support, the performance isn't that great, and the camera's not that great. I mean, there's so many things about this phone. I don't want to hate on it too much because it was a good phone when it first came out. It's just not that good of a phone anymore. So that's kind of how I feel about this phone as of this point. If you have any other thoughts or questions though, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that helps me so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.